Yeah. Testing 1, 2, 3. The quick fox jumps over a lazy brown dog. I'm thinking that I might probably use this as handheld rather than there because I noticed that I just kind of like bob and weave the whole time, and that probably wouldn't be so good if the microphone's fixed. All right. Testing. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, please come in and we'll take a seat and I'll get underway. Oh, that's right. Yep. 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 I forgot. Okay. Hey, there you go. Come on in. You're not coming in as hecklers, I hope. You know that's. Oh no. You ready? Showtime. There are a couple people outside that I know are here for this.
All right, we're going to get started in just a minute here.
Oh, here.
Well, thank you for coming out. This is part of the Central Wisconsin Book Festival. And before we get started, I'd like to read and thank some of the supporters for the 2024 Central Wisconsin Book Festival. We got support through Marathon County Public Library, Portage County Public Library, and the McMillan Memorial Library. The Community Arts Grant Program of the Community Foundation of North Central Wisconsin, with funds provided by the Wisconsin Arts Board, a state agency. The Community Foundation and the B.A. and Esther Greenheck Foundation. Support also provided by the Merco Foundation, Reuter Ware Law Firm, Center for the Visual Arts, the Portage County Public Library Foundation, the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point Libraries, Yankee Bookstore, Bound to Happen Books, Sojourn Booksellers, and Peking Restaurant. And today we have Robert Walker. He is a retired journalist and typewriter enthusiast with a collection of over 20 vintage machines. His debut novel, Typewriter's Block, is a unique blend of suspense, creativity, and supernatural elements. So please give a warm welcome to Robert Walker.
Thank you, Colin. And thanks very much to the Macmillan Library for inviting me to participate in this. And to all of you for coming. Thank you. Typewriter's Block, the first thing that I'll say about it is just to give a little description of the book, what it's about, the back cover description. It features a middle-aged freelance writer down in Florida who is a typewriter enthusiast and an aspiring novelist. He wants the great American novel. So being a typewriter person, he buys the typewriter of his dreams, the Hermes 3000. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's like the Cadillac of typewriters. He thinks that it will inspire him to greatness, but he finds after he gets the typewriter that it's inhabited by a spirit which calls itself JK, and JK's mission is to rid the world of mediocre writers. You can tell from there, conflict will ensue. And it does. So that's the description. So the first question you might have is, why would anyone in the 21st century write a novel in which one of the main characters is a typewriter? I'll get to that in a minute. But first, just a little bit of my background. A few years ago, I developed the longing to use a typewriter again. I used typewriters back in my early journalism years. My first newspaper job was in 1977, 76, somewhere around there. We used typewriters until the early 1980s in journalism. So it was a long time ago, but somewhere along the line I got this idea, yeah, I kind of like that feel. I'd like to type on a typewriter again. I haven't done that in a long time. And so I happened to mention that to my sister who lives in Ohio. And my sister is, well, she holds on to stuff. She's not a hoarder by any means, but she does hold on to stuff. And my sister said, after I said, I was thinking of getting a typewriter, she said, well, you know, I still have the one that Mom and Dad gave me for high school graduation. She's older than I am. This was 1969 that she got this typewriter. I said, oh, cool. And it still worked. It was great. It was an Olympia SM9, which actually is my favorite typewriter, partly for the sentimental reasons and partly because it is just a wonderful typewriter. But it didn't stop there. After I had the SM9 for a while, I thought, well, I'd like a typewriter like I had. And I didn't remember exactly what I had the first one because it was a used typewriter. I was a freshman in college, needed something cheap to type on. And it was something like a 1940s or 50s Royal or something like that. Found one that was similar. And then it didn't stop there. After that, there's estate sales and eBay and Facebook Marketplace. And there's all these typewriters out there, and they're so cheap and easy to get. So I ended up with, now I have, I think, about 20 to 25 of them. Probably more than my wife would think that I would need. So I do have a lot of typewriters. But you know, one of the things I found out along the way is that that's not unusual a hobby. There are a lot of people who collect typewriters. It's one of the nice things about Facebook. There's a lot of bad things about Facebook, but one of the good things about Facebook is that you find that no matter what your interest is, there are other people who share that interest. And Facebook has a number of typewriter affinity groups, the largest of which has like over 33,000 members in it. So there are a lot of people out there who collect typewriters and use them and write on them. And that kind of takes me to the next point that I have, is that I didn't get into the hobby just to look at typewriters, to put them up on a shelf and look at them. I actually wanted to use them. So I put them on a rotating schedule as typewriter of the week, and I'd use each one 2 or 3 times during its respective week. But I needed motivation and inspiration at that point. Because I got the typewriter there, I'm going to use it 2 to 3 times a week. Where's the motivation? Well, the first thing I did is I discovered the writers group, Write Night at Macmillan Library. It happens on the last Thursday of every month from 6 to 8 p.m. And no matter where you live, if you live here in Wisconsin Rapids, it's a great group. Show up, it's fun. We just have a nice time there. If you don't live in Wisconsin Rapids, probably your local library has a Write group. Yes? Oh, sure. The writers group at Macmillan is from 6 to 8 p.m. on the last Thursday of the month. So whenever the last Thursday is, that's when the meeting is, 6 to 8 p.m. But again, I think a lot of libraries have one. The Cultural Center here in town also has a writers group as well. So I began writing short stories for that group. Some of them were nonfiction, some fiction, and I often used the typewriters to create the first drafts or specific passages of those stories. I just built it into my typewriter of the week plan. Inspiration? Well, one day, and I don't remember when this happened, I was staring at a blank sheet of paper in the typewriter, not knowing what to write about. You know, there's only so many times you can type out, "The quick fox jumps over a lazy brown dog," and it kind of gets boring. So suddenly I had an idea. And I thought, I'll let the typewriters tell their story. And at first, my Well, the typewriter stories were they'd gossip and talk about each other and in the community that they were in, and which one was all rusted out when it came here and didn't work at all, and they had some fun, talked with each other along the way. But that led me to creating some backstories for specific machines. Now, some of the typewriters, like in the case of my sisters, I know exactly where it came from. But most of them, I really don't know its backstory, but I could invent backstories for them. Looking at each typewriter, and they're all different. You know, some of them are like small and portable, and they look fun. And you say, I bet that belonged to like a high school kid, college kid, and others are more business-like. I bet this was in an accounting firm, you know, and you know, you see, you could kind of like create the backstories based on their age and personality, and the typewriters tell those stories in a first-person voice. They talk about where they've been. Some examples of that, I have a 1961 Smith Corona Corsair Deluxe, which is just an adorable little typewriter. It went out, it ran away from its home in Minneapolis in 1968 with a young girl who was just graduating from high school and ran away from home to go to San Francisco. So the typewriter had adventures in San Francisco. I have an 1890 or so Calligraph 2. That one I put at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, and it became involved with the paper machine that ended up at the Nakusa Mill. These are all fictional stories. I'm saying they write them like it's first person. I don't really believe them. I'm not crazy. But they're fun stories. But one model of typewriter that's extremely popular, and that's what this presentation is all about, is this one that I have up here today. That is a Hermes 3000. Tom Hanks, who is a collector of typewriters, probably the best known of typewriter collectors, calls it the Cadillac of typewriters. Larry McMurtry, the guy who wrote Brokeback Mountain, in his acceptance speech for the 2006 Golden Globe Award for the Best Screenplay, he wrote, "My typewriter is a Hermes 3000, surely one of the noblest instruments of European genius. It's kept me for 30 years out of the dry embrace of the computer." Those are lovely words. So I had to have one. I mean, you know, because if you're a typewriter, you got to have a Hermes 3000. Eventually I found one from a guy in the Oshkosh area, and it was, at the time I bought it, the most expensive typewriter I ever purchased, 3 times as much as any one I owned, other ones that I owned at that time. I'll just tell you, for what it's worth, $300. Most of the other typewriters I have were under $100. Most of them were under 50. That was $300. It's a big expense, but boy, I got to have a Hermes 3000. So it came to be the Hermes' turn as typewriter of the week. And I'm looking at this term, the Cadillac of typewriters, and I'm thinking, I waited for inspiration to, what its backstory might be. And a thought came to my head. I wonder if this typewriter thinks I'm not good enough for it. And I thought, that opened a whole rush of creativity. What if a typewriter could say mean things that maybe saw its place in the world as being to shame mediocre writers and push them to abandon their careers and dreams? What would a wannabe writer do with such a machine? There's the story. It turned into a novel. It wasn't long before I had more than I could fit into a short story. I really didn't know if I could write a novel, but I decided to try. So Typewriter's Block took shape. The essence of the storyline was in place, but there's hundreds of details when you write a novel that needed to be worked out. Characters. I needed people with a blend of good and bad elements interacting in ways that were realistic and could hold readers' attention. And J.K., the typewriter, needed to have a personality as well that went beyond simple snarkiness, as well as an air of mystery. So when I first came up with that idea, J.K. was mean. All he did was just say terrible, horrible, mean things to Kyle, the main human character. But J.K. needed to be more than that. He needed to be more than just snarky. Plausibility. There's a lot of question marks that needed to be addressed. Why Kyle and other mediocre writers who had come in contact with J.K. in the past couldn't just get rid of the cursed typewriter. That would be your first thing. Like, I don't want it anymore. I just got to get rid of it. Why Kyle couldn't tell the world or anyone else about the cursed typewriter, because that's another kind of thing that you say, yeah, he could put it on display, take it to circus sideshows. My typewriter will talk to you. It'll say mean things to you, So how did that work? How the typewriter does things like getting information, controlling electronic equipment, moving itself. This typewriter is very powerful in the story. Let me tell you, this typewriter is very powerful. And why the typewriter is cursed in the first place. All of those issues get answered in the book. Trust me, I'm not going to be giving away. I don't want to do spoilers here, so all of those questions are addressed in the book. I also needed to do some research. My background is in writing. I started in journalism, went into communications, it morphed into kind of marketing communications and a bunch of stuff like that, public relations. And so I had familiarity with that, but I've never been a freelancer. I was always a corporate guy, worked for companies and got a paycheck. So I needed to know a lot about what the life of a freelancer was like. I knew nothing about publishing a book because I'd never published one. And my character, who wanted to become a novelist, needed to fail at that, so I needed to figure out how was that done. I needed to learn how it was done, so I did. There are dozens of other questions related to the plot as well, but those are the big things that I needed to do. Now, my original plot line had J.K. destroying Kyle. Somehow the typewriter was going to win and Kyle was going to be destroyed, but I eventually abandoned that, and I did it for, there's kind of like three reasons for that, or two main reasons for that. One is that the revised plot line that I came up with allowed both Kyle and J.K. to develop more fully. And that's one of the things that if I am speaking to anyone who's interested in writing themselves, your characters can't just stay the same through the whole storyline. They have to change. They have to evolve. That's part of what makes a novel. And secondly, it's going to sound stupid to say it, I prefer happy endings. I'm not a sad ending guy. I like things that end well for everybody, where people win. It turns out okay. And the thought of Kyle being destroyed by this typewriter and the typewriter moving on to destroy someone else is like, God, that's a downer. And so I needed to come up with something that was a happy ending. And I got to thank my daughter a little bit for, she's not here, she was at one of the other presentations I gave, I don't know if she inspired it, but we go out to breakfast on a regular basis. My daughter's 35, a grown-up adult. And then we go out to breakfast, and I was telling her about the story, and I said, I need one thing to happen that can make this plot work, and suddenly it came to me. Now, I can't say that because it'd be a spoiler alert, but there I was, and I tell you, I remember the moment. And I remember how happy I felt. It's like, I got to get home and write now because I know how to make this work. I know I can make it work. So I originally, after I was done, I originally had no intention of ever having this published because I didn't even know if I was ever going to write a novel. But since I had to learn about what went into publishing a novel, because that's what my main character, human character, wanted, I was kind of already halfway there. And then I was going to look at that. Now, I'm talking way too fast here, but that's okay. No one ever complains about getting out early. Some final thoughts that I have, and these are things that are more related to people who maybe are giving some thought of writing their own stories, getting published, and things like that. I'm just going to cover some things that, for me, as a first-time author, were worth every penny, and things that were not. And if there's anybody else out here in the audience, I'll just kind of turn it open to you, that want to comment on these things or their own ideas, I'd welcome that. So things that were worth every penny, things that were not. A proofreader. Yes, no matter how good you think you are as a proofreader or as a writer, you will not notice your own mistakes. It's just the way it is. Proofreaders cost money. Generally, they charge by the word. So in my case, I think my novel is about 50,000 words. I think it was about $500 for a proofreader. Worth every penny. I found a woman down in Viroqua who was very good at that. And if anybody is interested in a proofreader, I will give her name out to anybody who wants it because she's really, really good at it. Among the things that she noted, just to tell you what a proofreader does, I don't have a copy of my book, but in the initial book, in the book, when you open the first cover, I put this kind of like parody of typewriters giving positive reviews of the book. It says typewriters praise for writers or for typewriters block. I spelled typewriters wrong. The very first word in the book, the first word, the literal first word in the book, I spelled it as typewriters. And, God, so she noticed that. One of the things that she noticed, too, that made the story a lot better is that since, I mentioned that I wrote part of it on typewriters, initial drafts, but of course, you turn it over to a computer to write, because that's how you got to submit the file to get it published and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that computers do automatically by default is that when you use quotation marks, computers use what are called smart quotes. So at the start of the quote, it has the quote marked like that. At the end of the quote, the mark is like that. Typewriters do not have smart quotes. So when my typewriter is quoting somewhere or using an apostrophe or quotation marks, my original draft all had smart quotes in it, little bent ones, Well, typewriters can't do that. So if you have the book or get the book, you'll notice that the typewriter sends messages to Kyle. That's how it communicates with Kyle. But she noticed that. So I literally had to go in. It was a very tedious process, but it was worth it completely for the authenticity of the story to change all those quote marks, the single ones and the apostrophes, the single quote / apostrophe and double quote marks, to straight quote marks, because that's how typewriters do it. If I had a book where it was smart quotes, somebody would have probably pointed that out to me by mouth, saying, "Yeah, you must have a pretty fancy typewriter to have smart quotes on it," because I've never seen a typewriter that has smart quotes. They don't. So, proofreader, yeah, worth every penny. Another thing that I would say that worked for me very well is I did use an online service called AutoCrit. And it's a paid-for service, and it's sort of a combination of something that uses artificial intelligence and aggregates raw data into useful stuff. It reviews your stuff. It takes into account what your average sentence length is, whether you're using the same word too often, whether all sorts, literally dozens of writing dimensions are covered by AutoCrit. It's a really good editor. I found it to be. And then it gives you a score, too. Now, there's a temptation, as there is with anything that you're scored on. You start chasing points, and eventually you just kind of say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's good enough the way it is. I'm not going to see if I take out a comma here, whether it's going to raise this punctuation score by 1/10 of a point. You just say, no, I'm not going to do that. This is my writing style. But it was a very, very, very good investment in that, because a developmental editor is also a very expensive thing. And the AutoCrit was $350 if you get it on sale. It's like, I see it all the time on Facebook at like $700 or $800, and then it goes on sale. so if you are ever interested, just wait. It'll go on sale. I assure you, it goes on sale every couple months. And it was a very good deal. Great value for the price. One of the things I'm not sure of is cover design. Covers are indeed extremely important in a successful book. Those who say you can't judge a book by its cover have never tried to sell a book. People do judge a book by its cover all the time. And I did not do that, and I don't know whether I should have or not. I have a little bit of background in graphic design, which probably makes me better at graphic design than the average person walking down the street. But I am absolutely not as good at it as a graphic designer. Graphic designers are really good at that kind of stuff. So it was another one of those expenses along the way that I looked at and thought, yeah, okay, I'm just going to go with that. So that's a not sure of. Probably not for me on that is, we were talking a little bit about this, I think, before the meeting began, and that's marketing assistance. There are literally hundreds of companies out there who want to help market your book. I'd say at least 75% of them are scammers. At least, probably higher percentage than that. There are some good ones out there, but I tell you what, it's really hard to tell the difference between the good ones and the bad ones until after they already have your money and they've run off with it. I don't know what my recommendation to a would-be author would be on that, other than see if you can find somebody who's used somebody and they've had good results with it, and do it, because there's just a lot of, one of the groups on Facebook that I do belong to is, it's called writers and authors or something like that. And that group is just, it's like this daily torrent of scammers that because people put their title of their book and they say, I just published my book, here it is. And then immediately there's these messages, please DM me, I can help you sell and market your book. You know, and it's like, oh God, this is horrible. I did not do that, and it's hard to market a book. Again, maybe when we get into the question period, if anybody else here is an author and has some ideas on that, we'll share them with everybody. Thing that I spent money on that really was a waste of money for me was a book coach. And I hired that person early on. It was someone that I knew. This is where I'd make the recommendation. It's kind of like maybe getting home improvement done by a friend, and the project doesn't turn out well. What do you do then? You know, I mean, if it was a contractor that you didn't know, you'd say, yeah, you did shoddy work. I want either all my money back or part of my money back. If it's a friend, you say, what do I do now? I can tell you my book coach was a nice person. I've known her for a while. She's a big typewriter enthusiast. She's from Milwaukee. I thought she didn't provide any help at all. And it was just a waste of money. And I didn't want to jeopardize the friendship by saying, this is a real waste of money. And I want all or most of my money back. But that didn't work out so well for me. So those are the things. Summarize. Proofreader, yes. Proofreader / editor, whatever you want to call that. Absolutely essential. I would say no matter how good you are at that. And I spent my whole career writing that. So you're still not going to see your own mistakes. Cover designers, real important. Marketing help, maybe. And not a book coach. I know we have at least one other author in here, but are there anybody else, and 2 published authors in here that I know of? Are there more? Well, Gary, I'll call on you first because I know you have 4 books? 3, okay. What would you say, I'll put you on the spot a little bit here, about your must-haves and your must-avoids?
Don't ever hire a 10th grade English teacher to do your proofreading. Stay right away from all that. And don't hire a 10th grade English teacher to be your editor. Because first of all, they're going to fix things that don't need to be broken, or they don't quite understand where you're going. One of my books deals with Vietnam. And I had an editor that I hired, and her comment to me was, is it likely that 2 guys from Vietnam would die of cancer? Well, she apparently was never in the jungle with Agent Orange. So be careful about who you get. Cover design is really tricky because a lot of people who are doing quote-unquote cover design work are limited to what is in the common domain. They don't do original work, and they don't copyright the original work. They'll pull something from some file somewhere on Google, and that'll put your book together that way. So you have to be careful about who you get there. Now, the unit I worked with was the electronic publishing unit from Penguin Books, and they did a super job of setting my books up. And the other thing I would say, money well spent, is get a good content editor. Someone who is going to look at the tense of the tenses you're using, the point of views you're using, how you transition from one point of view to another, all of those kind of things. You're not going to catch it. We always call that writer myopia. You write it, you know what you mean, you know, and so therefore it's right. Well, not really. And these folks will come back and set you up, and they irritate you. I got mad at mine, you know, but the reality is they were right, especially point of view. We use point of view from a conversational point of view when we write, but that's not how it works when you write. You're not supposed to, you know, it doesn't work that way. So, okay. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
And Steve, do you have any thoughts on?
Because having published both, like individually published your work and then published it collectively? Yes.
I was in charge of the whole thing.
Okay.
The
But did you?
cover, the
Okay.
content.
And you didn't hire anybody to?
I used my wife right
Okay.
here, Linda,
Okay.
to read everything, and she provided a whole lot of information.
Are you still married?
That could be potentially even more problematic than the thing that I brought up about a friend.
Yeah.
So, okay. And when you were you were writing newspaper columns too. Did you have to edit your own stuff?
I wrote the column and sent it to the newspaper, and
Okay.
they could do whatever they wanted with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have a moment here. I'll describe. This is one of those things. My worst professional mistake. Since I have a moment here, I'll try to describe it. And it's another example of why editing your own stuff isn't necessarily the best thing to do. It was way back in 1980, which gives you a sense of how old I am. And I worked for a paper called the Adrian Daily Telegram. It was in Adrian, Michigan. And I was the layout guy at that time, did the page layouts. This was before we had computers to do that. We literally hand drew layouts where the layouts would go, and they'd go back to the composing room where they put the pages together, and they'd put the pages back there. Well, our paper served 12 high schools, 12 school districts in the county that we were located, and it was Lenawee County, Michigan. And when graduation time came up, we sent out a photographer to get a picture at the high school graduations, make it look like we were covering the local news, you know, just take a picture. And the photographer would come back with pictures like graduates hugging their parents, throwing their hats in the air, this, that, usual graduation stuff. At Tecumseh High School in Tecumseh, Michigan, in 1980, the commencement speaker was Carl Levin, a U.S. senator. That's a pretty big deal to have a U.S. senator as your commencement speaker. So the photographer took a picture of Carl Levin standing behind a lectern like this. There's a banner behind Carl Levin that says Class of 1980. It's all capital letters, Class of 1980. He takes a picture, Carl Levin speaking, the graduates in the front, Carl, banner. I get the picture as the layout guy. I said, we're going to run this picture on page 1. Carl Levin, it's a big deal. So we're going to put it on the bottom of page 1. And if you've ever worked in the newspaper business or dealt with photography, you know that photographers, when they take a picture, will generally try to get a lot of stuff in the picture just to make sure they don't miss anything that's important. But when you use the picture, when you're going to publish it, you crop. You crop a little tighter. And I think you might be starting to see where this is going to go. We get to the time where the paper's already out the door. We're in the newsroom. We're all kind of laughing because this is a busy morning, and then the afternoon comes. I was sitting at a desk with 3 people, my city editor, me, and the old curmudgeonly guy, and all newspapers had an old curmudgeonly guy in those days. And the old curmudgeonly guy looks at the paper that's already out the door, and he goes, ah! He flings it at me. I look at it, and what I see suddenly is Carl Levin with a giant banner behind him that says Ass of 1980. Yeah. Oh, God. I didn't really want to die. I wanted to be like abducted by aliens so I could just be gone, be not there anymore. And the paper was already out. I mean, at first, I tried to sneak back to the composing room to see if it was their fault, that they made the but no, they had the picture there. I put the crop mark on it, and they cropped it right where I put the crop mark, to their credit. And there it was. And I remember I called the senator's office immediately. I was just mortified. I mean, nowadays, political discourse is so vile nowadays that would be kind of normal. Back then, it wasn't. I mean, you just didn't do that back then. And I called the senator's office and just apologized profusely. I didn't speak to the senator himself. I spoke to a staff member. And honestly, even at that moment, I could sense in the staff member's voice that they were slightly amused by it. I wasn't. I was still mortified. I was mortified for weeks. It took me probably several months before I could laugh at that, but because it was horrible. It was just horrible. But it's just one of those things that just shows you things happen. I mean, it was an ordinary picture, banner behind him. It would have been so nice if they'd used upper and lower case, because then you maybe when saw Ass of 1980, you'd know there must have been something before that lowercase a. but there wasn't. It's a capital A, you know, and a capital S and capital S. And oh God, that was awful. So yeah, that's my my cautionary tale to editing your own stuff. Is that was my worst professional mistake when I called Carl Levin that. Any questions that you have? Yeah.
What do they do? That you said was accountable.
You know, that's a very good question, because that's probably maybe at the root of why I was not satisfied. Is it's a very vague kind of thing. A coach, I thought, because I'd never published a novel before, that I needed somebody to tell me the things that I didn't know, and it turned out she didn't tell me any of those things, and she read the novel, and she had some kind of crazy ideas about it that seemed to reflect that she didn't read it very carefully, and it turned out to not be helpful. It wasn't really, there wasn't a bad encounter between us then. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, I just spent a lot of money on something that doesn't really help me, and now what am I going to do because this person's a friend? You know, so, but yeah, a book coach, what they should be doing, I guess, on that is really working with an author to say, okay, here's your manuscript. I recommend, you know, a book coach could recommend you need a developmental editor. I mean, they're kind of that first line that says, hey, this story's great, it just needs a proofreader. Or they could say, hey, this story needs some work, and I might be able to help you with it, but maybe what you need is a specialist in developmental editing. They're more or less going to be your resource, kind of a hub to connect you with the things that you think you're going to need, whether that be marketing support, developmental editing, illustrations, you know, depending on the nature of the book. If it was a nonfiction book, it might be subject matter experts. There's all sorts of things that they could intercede on that. But yeah, that's probably part of the problem there, is that it is a fairly ill-defined job description, and perhaps I'll take some of the blame for not defining that as well as maybe it needed to be defined. Yeah.
For the two people that published the books and then the one that self-published,
Yeah.
Where did you publish versus, like, where did you publish and then where did you self-publish?
Well, I'll start on mine. The book is actually available through either Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com, and I use KDP Publishing for the Amazon thing, which really is, they're the giant elephant in the room. And Barnes & Noble, their user interface for getting a book published is so simple, and it's so user-friendly. I really liked it, but they don't sell, people don't go to Barnes & Noble to buy online books. They go to Amazon if they're buying online books. Now that said, a couple things I also explored is a company called Ingram Spark, which is an independent publisher. And Ingram Sparks is where a lot of independent bookstores buy their books. So a lot of it depends on kind of like how you plan on your distribution. I kind of looked at Amazon as being, that's going to be where mine's going to go through. And so I use KDP Publishing, and they're good. Their user interface is not as friendly as Barnes & Noble, but it's pretty friendly, and it's really, really inexpensive. I mean, you can publish basically for free with KDP, which is the arm of Amazon. They're really, you can literally publish for free there and have your book available, and I probably nobody's going to buy it, but yeah, but you've got nothing in it, you got nothing out. So, and now I'll turn it over. Steve, will let you go first, Sarah, with that.
Supposed to answer.
Where did you publish?
I picked a printer
Okay.
in Illinois.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Got a rate. Originally, because I printed it twice. The first time I printed it, it was $5 a book.
Okay.
And I think I printed 500 copies of that first book. And my whole distribution idea was I wasn't going to sell it. I didn't even have a selling price on it. I just wanted to mail it out to all my friends and family and anybody that I still had contact with from school that would influence me in positive and negative ways. I just sent it all out, and I got rid of all 500 that way. And I just recently republished it, reprinted it, I should say. And now it's $10 a book, and for less pages. I had 400 pages in the first edition. This one I think has around 300 pages. I had to chop some things out of there just so I could afford to get a decent amount. And I think I have enough printed probably to last me till I'm done with this world.
And before I go to Gary, I'll say Steve's model is actually used by another guy, and he's not here. He's named Art Rathburn, who's a local author. And Art prints with a printer, and he buys the copy. Obviously, the main disadvantage of that I see is that you do have a large upfront cost. Art's selling his book. He's not giving it away. He sells it. So he's got a whole inventory now that he has to store somewhere. And I live in a house, we just don't have space to store a number of books. Although my wife would say you got enough space to store 20 typewriters, but you know, that's probably do have enough space to store 500 books. But yeah, you can use that model. And then of course, everything, if you're selling it, it's 100% sale goes to you at that point. With the KDP model, it's a 30-70 split. The author, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, the author gets the, which does the author get the 70% or the 30%? I know I got a royalty check coming from them at the end of this month, but I can't remember if it's which way it is. But they'll explain that if you look into it. But again, they're gonna give you a cut of each sale. So it's sale by sale by sale by sale. You as the author, if you were doing events like this or wanted to sell them, you could buy a quantity yourself at a reduced price, and then they are yours to sell. But then you've got to go out there and hit the street if you're going to sell it. But Steve's model there, it's a really good way of telling your story to people, to just tell them more about you. That's a very legitimate model for certain kinds of things that you're writing. If you're writing a memoir, or things like that, and you just want people to have it and to.
Tribune for 11 years, and I called myself old guy, and this was still young bride, so she's still married to me. And I just picked out the best columns, and that's what the book is.
Yeah.
It's a collection of those columns.
Yeah.
So and now Gary.
My first book, I used iUniverse, which is a self-publishing firm. The difference between iUniverse and other companies is, number one, they're associated with Penguin Books. Number two, they have a series of packages you can buy. And the packages go from fundamentally self-publishing, where you do most of the work, which your experience has been, to one in which they will provide editors and content editors. In fact, my last book has been edited so many times I don't even know if it's mine or not anymore. But they'll do proofreaders, they'll set you all up. But it's an expense thing. How much do you have set aside in your budget? I used, well, they gave me for my third book, because I had published before with them, they gave me a significant discount. So that suggests to me that you can argue with them about price if you want. But I got their top package, and I was very happy with it. And when it comes to distribution, they automatically put those books out on Amazon, and you don't have to mess with any of it. And the interesting stuff about that is I got a royalty check one day, and I was looking at the list of where the books were sold, and there's this dollar amount, there was this amount in pounds. And wait a minute, in pounds? How did it, and what they do is you go to Amazon, your book gets on Amazon International. And I have had, that particular book deals with some of the Civil War stuff. So you do have an interest in England for that. But they take care of all that distribution. Because I spent 30 years in marketing, as Bob knows, and I'm not selling anything else ever again.
And a point that Gary makes that's useful too. When I say the user interface for uploading your book to KDP and to Barnes & Noble is so easy, that's my background. So it was easy for me. If you were really new to it, it might not be as easy. and having paying a company to do that, because there is formatting involved. You have to format the manuscript correctly so that when it goes up, it publishes correctly. And again, because of my background in communications, where I was used to dealing with printers and making printed materials, none of this was real surprising to me. I could do it. But to a newbie, it might be, pretty intimidating. And having someone to handhold for a little bit through the process might be pretty useful. So yeah, and actually, I think the three of us, there's just a lot of different ways that you can go about doing that, and I don't know if any one of them is the best way. It just has to be the best way for you.
Using a company like iUniverse or somebody else, check them out very thoroughly. I used them because they were associated with Penguin Books, and Penguin Books has a tendency to pick up books that are quote-unquote self-published, and use them. There are other companies out there which you're never sure who they're associated with, and I would check them out because they're going to sell you a package. You may never see them again.
Actually, I use that as one of in the storyline of my book. My main human character signs on with one of the companies that promises the world to him and doesn't deliver very well, because I needed the author to fail in the book. So that was the model that my human author followed in the book. And Gary's right. That's one of those kind of things. There are good ones out there, and there are the scammers out there, and it's really hard to tell the difference when you just look at their websites. You can check out reviews, try to do as much research on them as you can to find one that seems like it's legit and will work for you. Yeah.
Is this kind of autobiographical?
I should have answered that question. It isn't. Though there are autobiographical elements that appear in the story. But the main difference is that this character is a freelancer. I was always a corporate guy. I got that steady paycheck. I tell you, I have a lot of respect for freelance writers because it's hard. You're out there pitching every single day, trying to build a client base, and people are trying to steal your client base while you're out there. It's tough. It's a lot easier to be in the corporate world. There's probably characters in the book that Kyle interacts with who are the corporate guys, that are probably a little bit more like my autobiographical thing. Some of the elements that are in there, though, yeah, I got another small anecdote to tell. Without giving away too much of the plot, my main character finally does. He's in a situation where he's working in a restaurant, mopping a spill on a floor, and one of his friends who knows Kyle's background says to him, he says, every time I see you in here, you got a smile on your face, even though you're mopping a floor and you're smiling. And Kyle says to him, that's because nobody here has ever asked me to mop a floor that didn't need to be mopped. And that is a literal statement. I made that statement to one of my coworkers from the old Consolidated Papers from when I worked there. And she came in, and I was mopping a spill at Quick Trip, mopping the floor. And she literally stopped, and she says, you look so happy when you're here. And I literally said, that's because no one here has ever asked me to mop a floor that didn't need to be mopped. And those of us who have had professional jobs, they get that. We've all mopped floors that didn't need to be mopped. And that is soul-crushing. When you talk about what is soul-crushing in a job, to me, that's the most soul-crushing, when you're kind of like pouring your heart, all your God-given or man-created skills, whichever way you want to look at it, the stuff you do well, and you're working really hard at it, and it's meaningless. That is crushing. To mop a floor that needs to be mopped, that's not crushing at all. It needs to be mopped. So, you're getting something done. So that incident actually happened. There are one of the really weird ones is a really small one. When you work in the newspaper business, as I did, and Steve, you run into a lot of interesting people in the newspaper business. And in my first job in Morenci, Michigan, I was in the office all by myself. It was a weekly newspaper, and it was lunchtime, so the other two people were out to lunch, and I was in there all by myself. And I was down at the desk, And we had run what prompted this is the week before in our weekly paper, someone from California had called us to Morenci, Michigan, and said, I was just at a seance, and someone at the seance said that there was a person in Morenci, Michigan, who had a close encounter of the third kind, that is, a face-to-face with an alien. And we go, oh, that's funny, that'll be a good story. So we put it in the paper, you know, that this happened. And we said, anybody has any information on this? So I'm sitting in the office all by myself, and because it's lunchtime. And this guy walks in with this woman. And they're literally about, like, from me to Denny, this far away. I could smell the guy from here, okay? I mean, and the guy says, well, he says, I'm the Reverend Evans M. Jones. I hope I'm going to use real names here, so I hope he's passed away now so he doesn't sue me. He says, I'm the Reverend Evans M. Jones. He says, but most people around here call me Possum. And I'd heard of Possum Jones. And I said, Possum Jones? Yes, I heard of you. Possum Jones was a crazy guy. He literally, I probably met the clinical definition of a paranoid schizophrenic. And I'd never met him. I'd heard of him. The high school kids used to go out. He lived in a farm on the state line between Ohio and Michigan. And kids would go out there to kind of harass him, and then he'd come out there and shoot at them, which the kids thought were kind of fun, you know. And kids are weird, and they're kind of mean. I never did that, but I heard stories. So I heard a lot about Possum Jones. And Possum, in the next half hour while I'm there all by myself, Possum tells me that aliens do land on his barn roof, and he goes to chase them out. He shoots at them. And the scary thing for me, I'm only like 21 years old at this time, 20 years old. This guy wasn't lying. He truly believed these stories. And I mean, that was kind of like, my eyes were just like getting wider all the time. And, you know, and he's telling me stories on how he's on the state line and he works for the CIA and the FBI to control the flow of drugs between Michigan and Ohio. And he's not lying. He's telling his truth. And, I mean, then at one point he looks at me and he asked me if I was married, and I wasn't married at the time. He says, young man, he says, beware the Bible says, beware of the time when there are 7 women on your arm. I said, and literally came out of my mouth this. I said, Possum, I have enough trouble keeping one woman on my arm. So, but yeah. So anyway, there's a little passage in the book where one of the characters talks about interviewing a guy who said that aliens landed on the roof of his house. That came from that story, from Possum. My experience with Possum Jones. Newspapers are full of lots of interesting people. That could be a memoir book in itself, as folks that you meet when you work for a newspaper. So yeah, and then I know I drifted a lot from your original question. There are those little snippets of autobiographical elements in there, but the main character is not anything like me. For one thing, I've married and been married. Kyle's not. But the biggest difference was the freelancer thing like that. So, and I'm a corporate guy. Anything else? Yeah.
What did you find helpful about being part of groups on Facebook? Did you find that helpful?
Not so much the writers groups, because there are just so many, like, I mean, the metaphor I'll use to describe being in the authors and writers group is like, if you wanted help, it'd be like saying, okay, I'm in the ocean and I'm surrounded by sharks. I think I'll call for help and they'll help me. They won't. They're all just sharks. They're going to eat you. And so you're best off trying to not be seen by them. The typewriter people, though, on the other hand, are typewriter affinity groups. They're really nice folks. I've met a lot of nice people, gotten a lot of nice advice on how to fix this, that, or something else. Because again, I tend to buy the cheap typewriters, so they generally have something wrong with them. And they're very supportive, very helpful to each other. Yeah.
To answer that question,
yeah.
I purposely stay away from other writers when I'm looking for assessments of my work. I go to readers. I go to people who read a lot of books. I don't care what kind they read. Just see. A reader can kick out your weaknesses faster, because Bob's right. There's ego involved when you get other writers involved. Get somebody who's gonna read it, you know, who's read other books, who can talk to you about books, and they'll pinpoint what you need to do with yours.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there are writers groups that I've encountered. The best writers groups, I think, truly for me, the ones where I draw inspiration are the local groups, the one here at the library and the one at the cultural center. And they're much nicer. In the book, I have the main character isn't in a writers group, and they're really mean to each other. And our people aren't anywhere near as mean to each other. We're generally very charitable toward each other's writing, but it's very encouraging. They're very good. I really recommend belonging to a writers group. That you actually see face to face, real people. Yeah, Facebook, probably not so much. Maybe there are, I just haven't found them yet. Yeah.
Next.
You know, I have a potential for the next novel would be J.K.'s story, where he was before he ran into Kyle, and how he and the problem that I had, I didn't intend to do that, so I'd given away in this book why J.K. is J.K. and how J.K. became J.K. You'll find that out toward the end of the book. So I would have to kind of work around that. But there's a lot of things that I could do with it. I introduced a character in this book that would appear in that other book. The character I'll mention because he's early on. His name is Chris, and Chris is non-binary in his orientation. So Kyle spends a whole lot of time trying to figure out whether Chris is a male or a female, and finally figures out that it doesn't really matter. And he befriends Chris, but Chris actually betrays Kyle. But Chris mentions, he says, when Chris is talking about his background, he says, my mom, because Chris is only like 20 years old or so, or 21 years old, just out of college. He says, my mom, or you remind me a lot of my mom, he says to Kyle. She wanted to be a novelist too. She worked at the carpet mill up in Dalton, Georgia. She wanted to be a novelist. And she had a typewriter, but then suddenly she abandoned her dreams. Aha, that's J.K. She had J.K. way back in the day. You'll probably figure that out as you work through the story. But so that character he will be a little boy at that time. He was about 8 or 9 when his mother committed suicide, and after she abandoned her career. And so if it gets written, it gets written. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Fortunately, my next meal depends more on a guy in the black shirt who's my financial advisor. That's on my writing ability. What I meant to say, fortunately, my next meal does not depend upon sales of my novel, or else I'd be eating pretty cheap. And then Matt happened to be here, so I thought I'd give him a little boost. He's a good guy, too, if you're in the market for a financial advisor. Anything else? Yeah.
Using the company with Amazon to publish?
Yes, KDP.
So what's the risk in saying, okay, so I want to partner with them to hand them a book, and they don't all of a sudden declare it's theirs now?
They won't. Yeah, here's how you do that. There's a very specific answer to that. One of the things that a book has to have, and I didn't cover that, but one of the things a book has to have is an ISBN number, which is a unique identifier for a book. It's like your social security number is a unique identifier for you. Amazon will give you a free ISBN, but in doing so, they own your book. So the better solution, what's the recommended best practice on that, is to buy your ISBNs from a third party. The biggest one that's out there is, I think, it's a company called Bowker, if I'm not mistaken. It's Bowker. You can either buy an individual ISBN or you can buy 10 of them. I bought the 10-pack just in case I might need them down the line. But once you have that, you'll upload to Amazon with your ISBN number, not one that they've given you for free, because once they've given you that, they kind of like got their hands on your book. So, but if it has your ISBN that is registered to you, it's your book, and they cannot take it. They can't. It belongs to you. But that's a good question, and I should have probably mentioned that for anyone who is interested in publishing. They're not that expensive either. I mean, I think the 10-pack of ISBNs, I think I paid like $300 for, or you can buy one for $50. So, I mean, it's a pretty nominal expense, and it's an important one, because as I said, if you take their free one, you're running the risk that that book is suddenly now kind of somewhat sort of theirs in a great.
In between you and Balker, like when you buy your IS number, are you giving them a copy to?
No,
Balker,
Balker, actually, they almost seem like just almost like a third party for selling the ISBNs. And then the ISBNs are registered somewhere in probably some governmental agency that enforces copyright law. So Balker doesn't own them. They're just like a vendor of ISBNs, and they make the process pretty easy. And then after you buy it, they give you, here's your ISBNs. You log in. You have an account with them, and they'll say, here's your ISBNs, and then you say, I'm going to assign this title to that ISBN number, and then when you put together your book, that ISBN number will be printed on that book when it goes through. When you upload to KDP, you'll tell them what the ISBN number is that you have. This is your ISBN, and then it'll print just the way it prints on your book. It's a good question, though. That's because you don't want to lose control over your book, for sure. Anything else? Well, thank you. Yeah, right on time. Thank you all for coming. If you'd like to meet JK, he's been pretty quiet here, but every now and then he'll speak up and say something important. So, thanks for being here. I do. Yeah. Yes, and if you are interested in purchasing a book, I would be delighted.